My task here this evening is to introduce our keynote speaker. When I spoke to him this evening and realized he has a Jamaican roots, I decided I'm going to sing Bob Marley. Just kidding. Eddie S. Glaude Jr. is currently the chair of the Center for African American Studies and the William S. Todd Professor of Religion and African American Studies at Princeton University. He's also a senior fellow at the Jamestown Project at Harvard University. Widely regarded as one of the brightest young intellectuals of the U.S. today, Glaude offers a critical and insightful view on the problems currently facing Black America as well as the nation at large. He's the author of several books. His latest, In a Shade of Blue, Pragmatism and Politics of Black America, has been characterized as a tour de force, establishing him as one of the most visionary thinkers of our time. According to Cornel West, Eddie Glaude is the towering intellectual of his generation. There is simply no one else like him emerging on the intellectual scene. Born on the coast of Mississippi in a small town called Moss Point, Glaude brings to his scholarship and public service a sense of passionate vocation shaped by the tradition of African American struggles. As a graduate of Morehouse College, he was inspired by the courage and devotion of Martin Luther King Jr., the institution's most famous graduate. Glaude is a regular commentator on the Tavis Smiley Show and has been a guest on the Brian Lara and Mildred Gladys radio shows, to name a few. With each appearance, Glaude seeks to prod and to provoke, to insist and to incite, to encourage and to embolden fellow citizens to rise to the profound challenge of our day. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Eddie Glaude to Brockport.
How y'all doing? You're going to have to talk back to me. It is a delight to be here. It's cold. But you know me, you live with me. Dr. Frater, thank you for that generous introduction. Dr. Hewitt, please extend my gratitude to the President for this wonderful opportunity. I want to thank the faculty of the Department of African and African American Studies for all the wonderful work that you're doing. Dr. Moore, thank you for your leadership. Dr. Farley, thank you for helping found the department. Dr. Okoye, 41 years, where are you? There you go. Institution, aura of permanence. I like that. It is indeed a pleasure to be here with you. Now, I want you to put your thinking hats on. Okay, you ready? So here we go. On November 2nd, 1983, on a relatively nice autumn day in the White House Rose Garden, President Ronald Reagan signed the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday bill into law. Just 15 years earlier, King had been brutally shot down on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. And more than 100 cities throughout the nation convulsed with grief and anger. Americans of all colors had seen days. The violence had taken its toll. Law and order was demanded. A new center of moral gravity was required. And as if engaged in a ritual act of penance, each year after his death until 1983, Congress would entertain legislation seeking to honor Dr. King with a federal holiday. Each year the bill would fail. The nation was not quite ready to invite King into the pantheon of America's saints. But on this Wednesday in 1983, President Reagan invoked the words of John Greenleaf Whittier, one of the fireside poets, a Quaker, and an ardent abolitionist. It was a wonderful touch for the man who announced his candidacy for the White House with a rhetorical flourish about states' rights in notorious Neshoba County, Mississippi, the place where James Chaney, Michael Schwerner, and Andrew Goodman were murdered. Reagan quoted a line from Whittier's 1880 poem, The Lost Occasion, quoting the line, "Each crisis brings its words and deed." End quote. For him, at least at this moment, King's words and deeds stirred our nation, and I'm quoting Reagan here, to the very depths of its soul. He would go on to tell a brief story of the Civil Rights Movement, a story that confirmed for him that sense, quote, of true justice, that true justice must be colorblind, and that among white and black Americans, as King put it, their destiny is tied up with our destiny, Reagan said, and their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. By setting aside a day each year to remember him and the just cause he stood for, we've made historic strides, he went on to say, since Rosa Parks refused to go to the back of the bus. As a democratic people, we can take pride in the knowledge that we Americans recognized a grave injustice and took action to correct it. And we should remember that in far too many countries, people like Dr. King never have the opportunity to speak out at all. End quote. Reagan, the proverbial pat on his back. Reagan brilliantly drafted King's sacrifice and all of those who participated in the Civil Rights Movement into a broader story of American exceptionalism. The new holiday was in the end an affirmation of American values. It was the latest example in a long list of historical examples of America's arduous march to a more perfect union. And as he concluded, Reagan echoed King's powerful use of Samuel Francis Smith's "My Country 'Tis of Thee." All of God's children would be able to sing with new meaning, Reagan said. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. With those words, King was effectively ushered into our national pantheon. He was now, although many would continue to resist this fact, a true patriot. Now, one cannot help but notice the irony of the moment. Even those who were present felt perhaps a sense of the awkwardness of what transpired. Just a few weeks earlier, when asked by a reporter about Senator Jesse Helms' claims that King was a communist sympathizer, Reagan responded flippantly with a not-so-veiled, if wrongly dated, gesture to King's FBI files. We'll know in about 35 years, end quote. Helms had threatened to filibuster the bill, and to justify his opposition, produced a 300-page document of King's so-called communist affiliations and unseemly personal behavior. His efforts reminded many of a not-so-distant past, a past that profoundly implicated Helms and Reagan, when the ugliness of racial prejudice guided policy decisions. But Helms was roundly denounced in the Senate. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, tossed the report to the floor and with venom declared it filth. Others, like Senator Edward Kennedy, rejected its findings and the sensibilities of Helms with conviction and emotion. But President Reagan was not so clear. So y'all thought I was coming in here just to celebrate King, didn't you? I'm gonna make you uneasy, I promise you. Reagan was not so clear. He did not question the sincerity of Senator Helms' efforts to open King's FBI files. Reagan believed that the files would establish once and for all whether King was a loyal American. Apparently for him, this was still an open question. He went on to say, quote, "But since they seem bent on making King's birthday a national holiday, I believe the symbolism of the day is important enough that I will sign that legislation when it reaches my desk." End quote. This is far from a ringing endorsement. So the scene in the Rose Garden of Reagan invoking King's words as he prepared to sign this holiday into law carried with it a biting sense of irony. After all, this was the same Reagan that Gil Scott-Heron, the famous spoken word poet who gave us "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised," memorialized in that devastating parody B-movie. But oh yeah, I remember, Gil Scott-Heron said, in this year that we've now declared the year from Shogun to Reagan. I remember what I said about Reagan, meant it. Acted like an actor, Hollywood. Acted like a liberal. Acted like General Franco when he acted like governor of California. Then he acted like a Republican. Then he acted like somebody was going to vote for him for president. And we act like 26% of the registered voters is actually a mandate. We're all actors in this, I suppose. For many African Americans, Reagan represented a national retreat on civil rights. He was the poster child of a disturbing white backlash. Reagan's attack on affirmative action, his calls for constructive engagement with the apartheid regime of South Africa, his evisceration of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights made him the most unlikely supporter of a national holiday for Dr. King. To be sure, Reagan's use of King's words harkened back to Lyndon Johnson's invocation of "We shall overcome" before a joint session of Congress in 1965, but there was a difference. "We shall overcome" was the sound of slaves and their descendants. They were words rooted in a struggle for freedom that colored Samuel Francis Smith's patriotic zeal a deep indigo blue. The song carries with it the sense that one feels when one listens to Ray Charles singing "America the Beautiful." We all know the words, but it is the sound, his phrasing that stirs the soul. Reagan's use of "My country, 'tis of thee" seemingly lacked that feeling. And after he signed the bill, those in attendance began spontaneously and somewhat tentatively to sing "We shall overcome." Their nervousness mined the questions. Did the King holiday represent our arrival as full-fledged participants in American democracy, or was this the last nail in his coffin? One that would seal his fate as a national icon of America's promise and inherent goodness. And what would this mean for black communities in the nation going forward? Reagan's embrace of the King holiday followed a deliberate pattern that defined conservative approaches to the issue of race in America during the 1980s. Most who had once declared the importance of racial distinction now embraced the lesson they found in King himself. Quote, that true justice was in fact colorblind. As the historian Dan Rogers notes in his important book, The Age of Fracture, what conservatives wanted now was not a restoration of the pre-Brown social order with its memories, customs, institutions, and rules of racial place and etiquette. They did not want history restored or even remembered. They didn't want it restored or even remembered. What conservatives wanted now, they insisted, was a common equal playing field and judgment on the basis of individual merit alone, end quote. This shift in emphasis involved an appropriation of some of the language of the civil rights movement. A 1984 Heritage Foundation report noted that, quote, for 20 years, the most important battle in the civil rights field has been the control of language. Who would define the content of liberty and freedom? The meaning of America itself. King's "I Have a Dream" speech became an important resource in this effort. What stood out for conservatives was his dream of the day when all of Americans would be judged not by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character.